In 1953, American President Harry Truman ordered his Atomic Energy Commission to work on all forms of nuclear weapons, including the hydrogen bomb, a device so powerful it came to be known as the super bomb. This sparked a new level in the nuclear arms race, with the Soviet Union detonating their own device shortly after the United States. America is also the only country on Earth ever to use nuclear weapons in anger, killing hundreds of thousands of Japanese civilians across just 3 days in 1945, making World War II the human race's first ever nuclear war. Meanwhile, only one government in the Middle East has nuclear weapons. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, known as SIPRI, estimates Israel has no less than 80 nuclear warheads ready to use. Israel has also got a proven track record of regular attacks on neighbouring countries, including repeated and unilateral threats of attacks against Iran. Little wonder then that the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution urging Israel to join the Non-Proliferation Treaty. 161 voted in favour, only 5 voted against. And which country was one of the few who voted against this? You've guessed it, Israel's #1 supporter, the United States. This led us to ask some simple and disturbing questions. Can the only country ever to have used nuclear weapons in anger be trusted with them today? Should the nation which led the nuclear arms race also be responsible for decommissioning these weapons? And how do the public feel about Israel's possession of these weapons of mass destruction? And we began with a very disturbing question. We showed the public photographs of individuals who have been affected by nuclear weapons. You may find these photographs disturbing. We asked the public for their reaction. This is what happened.
Oh dear me, this is a baby born to parents who survived, obviously.
Oh my God, poor little bugger.
Pretty horrific.
Oh, that's terrible. Oh, makes me want to cry. Oh.
And that these are actual pictures, it's not makeup or anything.
Wow.
It's very disturbing.
This is decades, isn't it? Because you can tell by the guy's belt. That's at the time. Well, that's the sort of thing we've seen, haven't we, over the years, and that's obviously recent. And this is still all as a concept. Good God.
Oh, they're horrific, aren't they? Oh dear.
That's horrible. Do they even thought about that would happen after they throw the bombs? I don't know. That's inhumaneness.
How people can do this to one another.
When you look at stuff like this, you cannot envisage really what anybody that was connected with this or had a child like this or anything. I got 3 kids. I can't imagine what it would be like if any one of them looked like this. So yeah, this is just awful.
We showed these same photographs to our experts and invited them to give their response. Here's what they said.
It is extraordinary what human beings have been doing to each other for thousands of years. The way in which people are so callous when driven by certain incentives and desires. But there is something special about nuclear weapons, both in terms of the devastating long-term impact and, of course, the scale. Just a small number of nuclear weapons could devastate a whole country and cause genocide. And so nuclear weapons have, since their invention, been seen as in a particular class of their own. More recently, there has been a revival of international interest in the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons, the devastating consequences on human beings, upon the environment, and upon human society, should there be an explosion of a nuclear weapon or series of nuclear weapons. This is partly because awareness was high during the Cold War. We were all living under the shadow of nuclear war, and we knew it. Today, people are much more complacent. There's much less awareness, and the problem is that nuclear weapons are still seen as having a use, and people are less aware of the consequences.
Any human being will be shocked and angry for these brutal acts of one human being to another. Those people who dropped the nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki cannot be humans. Even animals will not do that. Because a war, justified wars for self-defense, to achieve aims, but there is no honor in horrifying acts like that. And by the way, this is an illegal act of criminality and brutality, because the international law does not allow indiscriminate bombardment which can affect civilian population. We all abhor and condemn the atrocities of Nazi Hitler. But actually, Harry Truman doesn't fare better than Hitler, because not only he killed civilians, not only he killed elderly women and children and babies, but even embryos in the wombs of their mother. So an act like that, really, I have no description for such brutality. And we all know that history is written by the victorious. So if the Americans and Allied forces did not come victorious out of this war, history would have made Harry Truman worse than Hitler.
Next, we asked the public if they could name the one country on earth to have used nuclear weapons to kill and maim hundreds of thousands of civilians, and whether they would trust that country with nuclear weapons today. Here's what they said.
Well, it is the USA, and do I trust anybody with nuclear weapons? We do not know whose finger is on a button.
I don't trust any country with nuclear weapons, because in that case it's really the politics then control the weapon, and if someone doesn't agree with the politics, then they have the ability to either forcefully make them change their opinion. And I think it's, you know, it's such a diverse world that everyone should have an opinion on something, and they shouldn't be threatened by any kind of weapon to be able to change that.
I'm quite torn about it, because nuclear warfare is and weaponry is kind of coming on the up and up in modern warfare, and the threat of not having a nuclear weapon to defend your country is pretty large. However, it's hard to justify that type of just catastrophic pain it causes.
I mean, America always wants to be seen as the most powerful country in the world, so I don't think they would ever give up their nuclear weapons myself. I think as long as they got them, they are a deterrent to other countries.
We turn to our experts on the question of America atomic bombs and whether they can be trusted with such lethal devices given their track record.
There have actually been hundreds and thousands of nuclear tests, but there is only one country that has ever used nuclear weapons in anger, and that has been the United States at the end of the Second World War. They justify that by saying that if they hadn't used those nuclear weapons, there would have been more people who would have died in taking Japan mainland. That, by the historians, has been very severely criticised, particularly in the last 10 to 20 years, when actually they have pointed to the entry of the Soviet Union into the war. So there is actually a sense in which the use of nuclear weapons by the Americans was unnecessary. And of course, those nuclear weapons caused 200,000 deaths in very short order, and long-term consequences that are still being experienced today by the Japanese. Those two uses of nuclear weapons have taught us a huge amount about the dangers and the horror of these weapons.
The country, of course, is the United States of America, which is the first country to use nuclear weapons for warfare against an enemy after the end even of the war, because Nazi Germany surrendered in 8th of May, and they signed an instrument of surrender at that time. So the United States demanded an undignified and humiliating unconditional surrender from Japan. And this is unfair. On top of it, if the dropping of the first bomb in Hiroshima is an act of illegal criminality, then one cannot find a description to drop another bomb after 3 days on the 9th of August on Nagasaki. So that proves that those people are inhumane. They do that to satisfy a savage and brutal desire to humiliate and undignify their enemies, and for no purpose whatsoever. Because if they did that as a deterrent, so Hiroshima was enough, because all the Japanese scientists realized that this is a nuclear weapon and they cannot defend their country against nuclear attack. They would have surrendered, as they did. So there was no need for the brutal, inhumane second dropping on Nagasaki.
America started the nuclear arms race, and across 35 years, the world went from 0 to 40,000 nuclear weapons. We asked the public if they felt America should lead the way again by getting rid of its nuclear arsenal.
I don't think it would be a terrible thing. I am definitely for a denuclearization of the world. I'm not sure how realistic it is, especially with today's tensions.
Yes, the short answer is yes. I think they're going down that road right now to what I see living over there. And I think that maybe, hopefully at least within the next 10 to 15 or 20 years, we might get to achieve that, because they have done an awful lot of that in the last probably 10 to 15 years. So hopefully this next 15 years down the road will bring us to a place where not only us, but the rest of the world can comply with that, something like that.
Yes, I do. Definitely. I do. And be like this country, where we don't believe, millions of us don't believe in it, do they?
I think it makes the most sense, to be honest. If you've got the most, you've got to lead by example. And I think anyone that's going to have the most weapons should be absolutely the first to dismantle first. And yeah, hopefully Russia and us and everyone else would follow suit. And then, yeah, we'd be everyone would sleep a lot safer at night, I think, and be a lot better world.
We asked our experts if America, the country responsible for starting the nuclear arms race, should also be responsible for ending it. Here's their view.
Just to be clear, it was actually a joint enterprise with the British, so I think the British share some responsibility here. The President of the United States, President Obama, did launch an initiative in 2009, and that then came to some success in 2010 with the signing of the New START treaty with the Russians. I think the President himself knows that this is a particularly deep and important responsibility that he has. He has not fulfilled it. He has not pushed it as hard as he could have done. He has, of course, a lot of opposition within Washington. But then look at a country like Britain. You know, we live in the safest corner of the safest continent, and yet we still retain nuclear weapons, and there is no significant security justification. There are serious problems when it comes to Britain's, or indeed any country possessing nuclear weapons, around the concept of deterrence, which is the core philosophy behind nuclear deterrence, behind it possessing nuclear weapons. And of course, deterrence relies upon a state being willing to do not only irrational things, but inhuman acts. So the possession of nuclear weapons undermines our very nature as human beings and as states that claim to represent the better part of human interaction.
The United States always behave with the cowboy mentality all over its history. So one cannot expect that they will do that voluntarily. The world have to enforce that on the United States. They have got 40,000 nuclear warheads and bombs, while we all know 10% of that is enough to destroy the whole world. So why is this quantitative mentality of having more and more and more, forcing their opponents, the Soviet Union, in a nuclear race and forcing other countries of the world to join this nuclear club?
Israel is the only regime in the last 25 years in the Middle East to have launched a series of wars against its neighbouring countries. Can they be trusted with nuclear weapons? Is the public's opinion.
No, nobody should have them, and especially countries who has like war ambitious or trying to get something. As far as I know, Israeli is a country who has been on kind of small wars or big wars for the hundreds of years. So even those countries, especially those countries, shouldn't have those kind of weapons.
I'm not anti-Jewish. I'm not anti-anybody. I'd like to think I'm a humanitarian, a humanist. But it frightens me, the thought that Israel does have a nuclear capability.
It's a state that, to a very large extent, is far too influenced by what I would call religious extremists. And I really don't trust anybody that takes that sort of extreme view. And while those people have a say in the nation of Israel, I think it's probably a very dangerous country. Likewise, with any fanaticism taken to any extreme, I think there should be a great movement to remove weapons from these sort of people rather than give them to.
Deeply uncomfortable. I'm very, very uncomfortable about that. I mean, they've shown they're willing to do some pretty outrageous things. So yeah, it's very unsettling.
Well, I don't think Israel should have nuclear weapons. And why have they got nuclear weapons, and why don't they get any criticism for it? As Iran does, but Israel doesn't. It's complete hypocrisy by the West.
Oh, well, I think I've always had concerns about Israel and the way they behave anyway, is the truth. You know, they're eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth sort of policy. And the way they, you know, you damage us, we'll damage you. That's their way of thinking, and that's the way they will continue to think. And I can't see there ever being a change there. And that is a concern as well.
I think it's just as terrifying as anyone else, I think, if I'm honest, because anyone can push the button and anyone can launch them. But obviously they're in a very tricky situation at the minute, and they have been showing somewhat excessive force. And yeah, I think everyone should remove them, to be honest. I don't think you should particularly pinpoint one area and just say they should get rid of them first, because I think that's foolish, because everyone's violent and every country has its histories.
So that's the public's view. In the light of Israel's repeated military interventions against its neighbouring countries, can they be trusted with nuclear weapons? This is what our experts thought.
I don't think any country should be trusted with nuclear weapons. They are particularly ineffective at providing security and particularly uniquely dangerous. So I think possessing nuclear weapons is a problem. But Israel does have particular issues around its status, perceived status as a victim state. It has a lot of paranoia. Paranoia and a victim status is something that is particularly dangerous when such a state has nuclear weapons. I think that all states in the Middle East need to look at the nature of their interaction and the way in which nuclear weapons would actually complicate and make them worse. Just as nuclear weapons have made the European states, in the broader sense of the word, less stable. The relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union was far less stable than many people would have us believe today.
A rogue state like Israel should not be trusted with nuclear weapons. Also, we have to realize that Israel until now never admitted that they have got that big arsenal of more than 300 nuclear warheads. They did the program in secret, and until now, they never admitted that they have this nuclear arsenal. So it's an illegal act. And where is now the International Atomic Nuclear Agency, which is going to Syria and Iran and other countries which don't have nuclear arsenals while neglecting to go and inspect the nuclear arsenal of Israel. Israel, they are saying that they will use these nuclear weapons as a last resort. What does it mean, a last resort? We all saw the brutality and abhorrent effect of dropping nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So they want to do that in the Middle East. And it's actually an act of suicide, because we shouldn't forget that in Chernobyl, for example, an accidental leak of nuclear reactor affected nearly the whole of Europe. So if Israel use a nuclear weapon in the area, it's an act of self-destruction plus killing their neighbors.
Looking to the future, what could result from the development and stockpiling of nuclear weapons by America and Israel? We asked the public to share their predictions.
Well, the worst case scenario is that someone's going to use one of these things, you know, or lots of these things in an act of desperation.
Armageddon. It's funny that it's the town where it comes from, the Middle East. Megiddo, Armageddon. That is the one town in the Middle East that is mentioned in the Bible to be the end of the world.
Somebody accidentally would discharge a nuclear weapon, and that's going to start a global confrontation. But the next worst thing after that is that any person, any idiot on the face of this globe would, in hate or anger or anything like that, actually press the button and start a nuclear war.
We could all die. Of course, that's the obvious will happen at the end of it.
I'd love it to be positive, but realistically, we're running out of resources, running out of food, running out of space, running out of water, running out of everything. I think, tragically, violence is going to be the way that people try and take things back. As we've seen before with Iraq, we need oil, take it. And if nuclear weapons is what it comes down to, then I think that's what people will use. And I don't think there will be a positive ending as long as nuclear weapons are an option.
So, a gloomy prognosis about the future from the public. Can our experts be any more optimistic?
The problem with states possessing nuclear weapons is that they could be used. They could be used by accident. They could be used in a crisis as leaders make decisions that are based on insufficient information, or indeed the need to be seen to be irrational. If you are in a crisis and your opponent thinks that you could do the unthinkable, that is a very powerful thing. So leaders make threats, and sometimes they then have to carry them out even though it's not rational to do so. When you add nuclear weapons to that mix, you have a very dangerous cocktail, and it's luck more than judgment that has enabled us to get this far 70 years after the first use of nuclear weapons without another nuclear explosion, or worse, series of explosions.
The development and stockpiling of nuclear weapons by America and Israel remains one of the most dangerous aspects of global politics. Let's remember that America is the only country on earth ever to have used nuclear weapons in anger, while Israel continues to occupy land, make threats and launch aggressive wars against its neighbours. As long as some governments are still willing to possess nuclear weapons and use force, the world is not safe from the prospect of a war which could end not just millions of lives, but civilization itself.